What's up, YouTube? Welcome in another YouTube live show. I'm finishing up my tweet here as I get going. All right, we've got actual football to talk about. You guys excited for that? Not only that, but we've got major college football playoff news to talk about that's going to affect the league. I'm fired up today, man. I'm really fired up today. Thank you for those of you who are in here. I see the chat speculating about when I would show up. You guys know the drill by this point. I try to. Here's the thing. I try to be like on and have it ready and waiting, like saying I'm going live and just sitting there at that waiting screen by the aforementioned time when I start. Then I give you like a little 5 minute anticipation period and everything builds up. When you go to the movies, do they just show you the movie right away or do they make you watch some previews? You have to watch some previews. So I didn't have any actual like previews for you, but you guys can entertain yourself with the previews there in the chat. So, man, fun week one, good week one, I think, for the Big 12 overall. And even if you include the four teams that are going to be coming into this league afterwards, like Cincinnati, even in a loss, I think really showed and acquitted itself pretty well in that game against Arkansas, who I think is a very, very good team out of the rugged SEC West. And then everybody else, other than West Virginia, in a knockdown, drag out, really close game with the defending ACC champs, everybody else won. And really, the big takeaway to me is that I think this league is going to be a bear for anybody to rip through undefeated or with one loss. And I know that's almost a weird take to have out of week one when I'm saying like I felt like everybody played pretty well. The league was pretty impressive in week one. And my real big takeaway from what happened on the field is I think that the league is probably going to have a really tough time getting somebody in the college football playoff. Like I would not anticipate a playoff team emerging from the Big 12 this year. And it's unfortunate, but I think what we're seeing out of the conference is not a great team up at the top, like an elite team. When I say great, understand I mean elite, like college football playoff caliber, elite team at the top of the league, but that everything else is pretty solid to good. And that's really how I felt about the league going into the year. But I mean, I think Kansas moved me in a positive direction. I think West Virginia moved me in a positive direction. I think Texas Tech moved me in a positive direction. Understanding, of course, the level of competition that some of these schools were playing. That's definitely a factor here. But I still, there are things, especially with the Kansas case, that you have to say, like, look, man, when was the last time they did that to anybody and look like that against anybody? That's a step in the right direction, and that's a very positive sign. So, look, I know Oklahoma looked pretty good, but I didn't look at it and say, hey, a win over UTEP really changes anything, I think, as far as them being a playoff caliber team. So, ergo, I arrive at my conclusion there that I think what we saw in week one kind of confirms the narrative and the thought that this is going to be a pretty deep league with a lot of very good teams, but nobody that's going to pull away up at the top, and it's going to be tough week in and week out for everybody. I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, everybody in this league has really lost the weekly gimme. It will probably happen sometimes this year that Kansas will get really knocked around. But I think on a given week, I mean, it's no longer just, hey, Kansas opponent minus anything, and you take whoever they're playing to cover. I think that much has been clear. I will definitely give Kansas that credit coming out of week one. But there's a lot more to talk about just than that. Speaking of Kansas, like Neil Brown, boy, your job might be on the line this week when West Virginia entertains Kansas and what's going to be a fascinating opening to the Big 12 schedule. But beyond that, the playoff news is massive, and I think it really puts a halt to realignment, likely for now, because of the implications of having access to the playoff and how all of that will trickle down. Like what legitimate access to the playoff basically means for the Pac-12. I mean, we'll talk about it for the Big 12 too. I think it's a really good thing for the league to have that virtually insured. But, waiting to pick off the four corner schools and hoping that the Big Ten was going to further cannibalize the Pac-12, I think that's probably where this stops. I think that's where you're going to see the biggest reaction to this in terms of the playoff expanding. Just all of a sudden, and the news dropping at like 4:30 on a Friday, all a kind of bizarre situation with how all of that was handled. But I think there are a number of reasons that easily lead you towards, yeah, that's probably going to be it for now, for this round. I mean, I think it helps out. I'll put it this way. I think it helps out the Pac-12 TV deal a lot. I think it will also help out the Big 12 TV deal, but I think it will help out the Pac-12 TV deal a lot. So let's get rolling. Glenn is first in with a donation. And if you guys want to get your question or comment on the show here, the way that you do that, you can ensure that you get your question or comment on the show tonight by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. That will supersede everything else in the chat, which will get pretty crowded here throughout the night. And you can drop in your question or comment. That way, it ensures that I will read it, cuts through all the rest of the noise in the chat, and it supports the work that I'm doing, bringing you Big 12 content week in and week out here on this channel. So it is always much, much appreciated. Glenn, as I said, first out of the chute, Glenn says BYU kicked butt. They did. They rolled South Florida, which is very paramount, I would say, for BYU because they have two really tough games coming up. BYU Baylor this week in Provo, man. That is awesome. That is an awesome game. And frankly, College Game Day should be there instead of going to Austin for the beatdown that is going to be Texas and Alabama next week. But I digress. What are you going to do? Obviously, ESPN is going to make that choice for the brands. But you've got that and then a road trip to Oregon. I know that may not be looking quite as tough as it did a week ago. Sorry, Ducks. That was rough. Getting drugged 49-3 by Georgia. But yes, BYU has a really tricky schedule coming up. So that was a must not only win, but just a must like gain some confidence kind of a victory. And did so against former Baylor quarterback Gary Bohannon at USF. Really nice effort from BYU to get that W. So yes, Glenn, they sure did. Thank you for being here. All the BYU fans who watch this channel, much appreciate you guys. Christian in with a donation. What's up, Christian? Christian says, regarding expansion, surely the per school guaranteed dollars weighs heavier than the chance at the playoffs. No, go Cougs. Well, yes, but look, there's a lot to it. I mean, consider the fact that Oregon is one of the main teams that we're talking about here. They're going to have Phil Knight money that they can utilize a lot, right? So if they have playoff access and they can look at it now and say, hey, playoff access is going to be easier in the Pac-12 than it is going through the rough and rugged Big Ten, even if there are 6 extra at-large bids, that still means you probably can't lose more than 2 games in a year, maybe 3 in the Big Ten, whereas you could just say, hey, if we go through, win the Pac-12 championship, even if we have a loss or 2, if it's the top 6 conference champions, we can even be behind a group of 5 conference champion and still make it into the playoff every single year. It's a massive bargaining chip for access. It will, I think, drive up the value of the TV contracts because the Pac-12 regular season suddenly becomes more meaningful. Pac-12 championship game becomes more meaningful. There are a lot of things like that that can help spruce things up and just tilt the scales at least a little bit right now. Plus, the Big Ten may look at it and say, if we're adding better teams and creating a super league right now, we're going to run into the same problem that I was just talking about with the Big 12 there, right? Which is cannibalization from within. The league is too good, and the second tier of the Big Ten has a harder time making the playoff, like your Michigan States, Wisconsins, et cetera, of the world, like everybody outside of Ohio State and Michigan, and then I guess USC, depending on when they get into the league. So that is kind of a basic. I'll get into more of the details of it, but that's kind of the basic case that I would lay out for it right now. So yes, there will still be a massive financial advantage potentially to being in the Big Ten, but was Oregon going to get a full revenue share there anyway? Don't know. Now playoff access, that's one of the important pieces here. The two things really, like straight up money that you're getting from everybody and access to the playoff. Those are both very important. And for Oregon in particular, with a super donor like Phil Knight, it may not matter quite as much to them. But it's a good question. It's a very good question. So I definitely appreciate the question and the thought there. And that's one of the things really to dive into and discuss today. R-Web, what's up, R-Web? R-Web in here, as always, says if the Big Ten and the Big 12 can divvy up the best of the pack, one less league to divide the college football playoff pie, the schools get a greater share and opens up an AQ bid. Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say that you're wrong with any of that. This is why I'm saying for now. I mean, I don't think this stops realignment, period. But for now, it seemed like we'd already seen what it was like the Iowa president, and then rumored that the Ohio State president had said something about not wanting to expand anymore. And if you're the Iowa president, I mean, first of all, you've got problems with your offense anyway, scoring 7 points without even a touchdown on Saturday. But if you're someone like Iowa, you're looking at that like, hey, let's not add Oregon and Washington and make it even tougher for us to get into the playoff. Like we may be able to sneak into this 12-team playoff thing. And it felt like some of the momentum in the college football world, like from the SEC, actually, surprisingly enough, had been towards, hey, why don't we just chill and kind of back off here right now as far as not killing the sport, but totally turning it into a 2-league thing and alienating large swaths of the audience regionally, right? Seemed like there had been some momentum pushing toward that already. This, I would think, would just usher in more of that and give it another nudge toward that. So that's my thought on it right now. And I'm going to read you some of what John Wilner had to say about it from the Pac-12. And I agree with almost everything that he said as far as that goes. So Doesn't mean it's done forever, but at least for right now, it seems like everybody collectively, and I know the playoff in general is just a money grab, like people, commissioners, president, well, really it was the presidents and everybody on the board here that made this decision. We're looking at it like this is too much money to pass up. So I get that money is still a part of it, but I have to think that there's at least a little extra piece of it that is right now everybody's kind of moving toward like, let's not totally rush to turn this thing into the AFC and the NFC and make it just the NFL model. Let's not totally rush to that. And I think there's there's a part of the Big 12 weekend that actually plays into that as well. I'm going to give you that as one of my Big 12 hot takes here from week one. But I appreciate that insight and the comment there, R Web. Christian, thank you for this one, Christian. What's the temperature up to for that UCLA game? Yeah, it was like every time I saw on Twitter, UCLA, if you missed it, you can find it on my Twitter account at Jail Kurtz. But they had about as poor attendance as you could possibly have for a game. I mean, there could not have been more than 5,000 people in the Rose Bowl for their game against, I think it was Bowling Green that they played on Saturday. Could not have been more than 5,000 people. Now, yes, early game in the sun, and at first it was like I saw a tweet that was like, oh, it was 90 degrees in the Rose Bowl. And then Doug Gottlieb was like, oh, it was 95 degrees in the Rose Bowl. And he said, we have so much more to do out here on the West Coast. Yes, clearly forgetting your roots there, Doug. We have so much more to do out here on the West Coast and blah, 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 blah. You know, the same argument that you always hear. But it's like every time he gets told now to defend UCLA or USC, which was not all that heavily attended either, it gets ratcheted up even hotter. So it's like next time it'll be 115 degrees. And it was bearing down on all 2,000 people that decided to step out to the Rose Bowl to watch UCLA decleat Bowling Green. So, yeah, not good once again. But the Pac-12, I mean, and UCLA and USC, I guess we can't really consider them the Pac-12 anymore. They're going to take crap for that all the time. It's just we know that's the deal. In LA, they're not going to draw, and there are always going to be embarrassing crowd shots there. Unless and until USC really gets it up and running, because Lincoln Riley's squad did look pretty good against an overmatched opponent, but they looked pretty good in week one. Okay, let's dive in. Here's how I want to do this, especially since I just teased a little bit of the take on college football playoff expansion and what that means for realignment. I'm going to save that until after the football stuff. This video, I'm going to shoot for as much like half and half as we can get here. But since we have games, I want to talk about the games. I will certainly discuss realignment and just this bombshell news that we got from the playoff committee. But it's like, why drop it at 4:30 on a Friday right before Labor Day and the first weekend? I know ultimately why is because they're afraid people would change their minds if they didn't just get it out there and make it official. But that's a little bit annoying because it feels like we have to piece everything together here. And I'm so fired up and excited about the games that I really want to talk about that. So here's my message to you. You guys just saw week one of games. Talk your bleep, get in there. Hit the donation, the $ below the chat box where it says say something, and let me know about it. If you're fired up about your team, if you're ready to talk some smack, Houston and Texas Tech fans, I would expect that there's going to be plenty of back and forth between you guys this week. BYU and Baylor maybe a little bit more civil, I would imagine, than the Texas Tech Houston dialogue that's going to go back and forth. But I'm here for it, man. Let me know what you thought of week one. If you have Big 12 hot takes, I specifically asked for those on Twitter. Your week one hot takes from the Big 12, I am very much here for as well. I got some great feedback on Twitter with all of that. But as I said, look, opening weekend for the Big 12, 9-1. Only loss was the heartbreaker for West Virginia with some real controversy at the end. Well, maybe I shouldn't say real controversy. I've seen some West Virginia fans still disputing whether or not that was a catch at the end. I mean, it was really close. That was very, very close. Tough break. Maybe the controversial part here is the decision-making of Neil Brown that led to that. And obviously just a rough drop from Bryce Ford Wheaton, who was having a tremendous game for West Virginia. Absolutely hated to see that. But I think West Virginia's performance is a piece of the overarching storyline to me, which is that week one confirmed that this is going to be a pretty solid league from top to bottom, maybe lacking the real star power at the top, but that is going to be just a beast for anybody to get through unscathed throughout the entire year. And I see Dylan, thank you for the donation. Dylan says, Jalen Best Daniels in the Big 12. So some JT Daniels smack there from Dylan about Jalen Daniels at Kansas. Yeah, a little sloppy at times for Jalen Daniels, but ultimately, I mean, pretty good. And Kansas, pretty good for themselves overall, winning that game. What, it was 56-10, I believe, was the final for Kansas, which just, I mean, that just has not happened much at all for them over the last 15 years in the college football abyss. Yes, it was 56-10, just blitzed them from the word go, 35 to 3 at halftime. There no chance, no chance at all there for Tennessee Tech. And so if you wanted to look at this and say, well, John, they did a couple of years ago under David Beatty beat Rhode Island 55-6. Yes, fair enough, they did. And I look, Tennessee Tech, I think is a very bad FCS team. I think they're much worse than, for instance, last year the South Dakota team that Kansas played and only beat by 3, and the South Dakota team that K State saw, for instance, this weekend too. So it's a lower caliber FCS team, but it is few and far between when Kansas has come out and dominated and really taken advantage of those situations. I mentioned they won by 3 over South Dakota last year. They beat Indiana State 24-17 in 2019. They lost to Nichols in 2018, 38-16 over SEMO in 2017. Like this just, it has not happened much. So I'm just here to look. I'm the K State guy, right? You see the painting or the poster in the background. But I will give them credit, not take anything away from that kind of dominant performance and the energy and just, I mean, they look like a team that, can function, knows what they're doing. I think it does validate some of what we've heard about Kansas this offseason and the Lance Leipold hype. Again, I'm not saying this is a 5 or 6 win team, but I think if you're thinking Kansas can win 4 games and maybe a couple of conference games, yeah, I mean, this is the type of performance that would push you towards that and continue to, I think, bring you around to that. And that's the biggest piece of all of this. If we're talking about the Big 12 being a tougher league from top to bottom, if Kansas is not going to be just a pushover that you can beat by 3 touchdowns at the very least every week, just simply by showing up, which is frankly what it's been for the last 15 years since Mark Mangino left town, well, that provides a much different dynamic throughout the Big 12, particularly for anybody not named TCU or Texas, because TCU has been bit by Kansas throughout that time period, and Texas obviously has. And TCU, even when they haven't lost, they played a lot of really close games that were way too close against Kansas. So now everybody else, it would appear, is going to have to deal with some of that. Now, West Virginia is another team that I think many people had toward the bottom of the Big 12 standings. I mean, it's tough to really shake all that out. I guess Texas Tech, probably the most popular pick to be next to last. But then you're talking about like West Virginia and TCU in that next tier. West Virginia is the next team that I thought looked substantially better than I expected them to. The problem for West Virginia, I think, is going to be like, can they protect JT Daniels, who's had an injury history, obviously, throughout his career? So I would understand if you're a Mountaineer fan and you have a lot of concern about that coming out of the game. But outside of that, man, a lot of fight. And I know Pitt's replacing a lot from the team last year that won the ACC, but that's still a pretty good team. That's a road game, understanding that there were a lot of West Virginia fans who made the trip for what was just an incredible atmosphere. But that's a tough spot. And JT Daniels, despite running for his life sometimes, stayed pretty poised. And I think showed the arm talent and just more poise probably is the apropos word than what West Virginia has had at quarterback here in recent years. So I would take a lot from that. They had, God, the running back, the freshman running back. I love that kid. I had him on my list here of stars from week 1. Yeah, CJ Donaldson, helmet sticker, if you will. If you watch college football final and they give out the helmet stickers, helmet sticker, if you will, to CJ Donaldson of West Virginia, who had 7 carries for 125 yards and 1 touchdown as a true freshman. That's good stuff, man. That is good stuff. He looked really good. I'd be excited about that if I were West Virginia. And they really, I mean, they should have won the game. West Virginia should have won the game. Had it. I hated the decision from Neil Brown. Obviously, the pick 6 plays a large role in this too. And what can you do? I mean, Bryce Ford-Wheaton had been the offense for West Virginia before that, and he still, I think, had 96 yards receiving and a couple of touchdowns. Looks like an absolute stud, and I think that will be a pretty lethal combination this year, Daniels to Ford-Wheaton. But man, yeah, it's a game West Virginia had. They're driving with 6 minutes left, up by 7. They have the ball at the plus 48-yard line. It's 4th and 1. They've been running the ball very well. It kills me that Neil Brown did not make that decision to go for it. And he doubled down, by the way, in the post-game press conference and said he would do it again. He would take the conservative way out there. But I would have, if I'm him at that point, had more faith in my offense. Again, analytics would tell you that that's the better play. That's kind of the way college football is going. That's more of like an old school take to say, no, we'll try and pin them and punt it inside the 15 or whatever. And even beyond the obvious decision that everybody is roasting here, which I think Neil Brown deserves to take some heat for. And I really wish he would reconsider his position on that. Based on game flow too, like momentum. You had the momentum. You're up 7. You would turn that game around. That was, you needed like one more play, and it felt like it was going to be over. So go get that play, man. Your job's on the line this year. I would not be coaching conservatively, especially in the backyard brawl. I hated it. I can understand the other side of the argument, but I really hated it. I think it's kind of living in the past, old school sort of argument to be like, nah, the right move there was to punt. But I also hated later in the game that so it's the last drive for West Virginia, right? They need the touchdown to tie. And I'm going to pull up the exact scenario here because I went out and had that ready to go. So they're at the Pitt 22 with a minute 10 left, down by a score. You've got 2 timeouts. JT Daniels gets sacked, and Neil Brown doesn't use one of the timeouts there. And so then the clock runs. They rush a play. It doesn't go well. And then they have to use a timeout even still. So I get the idea of wanting to save the extra timeout there, but you just can't. When you take a sack, you can't. You got to regroup, get your offense set up, and get everybody like back relaxed on the same page, and then go attack from there. I did not like the game management from Neil Brown. My heart absolutely breaks for West Virginia fans because I know West Virginia fans, they clashed with me when I had them lower in the Big 12 than what they thought they were going to be this year, when I was not as high on the hype train after the JT Daniels news as some of them were. I know how much you guys hate Pitt. I know how much that rivalry means. It had been over a decade since the game had been played, and you have this thrilling game with over 3 million people, by the way, watching it. And then all of a sudden you lose that way. That way, it was a brutal way to lose all the way around, all the way down to the fact that you almost have that catch there at the end of the game, and it winds up getting overturned. Just a brutal way to lose for West Virginia. So I feel for you guys big time, but I think if you can step back from that, and I know that's really tough, I think it does provide some positive hope for the rest of the season, with the caveat that it's a tough spot, honestly. And when have we said this? It's a really tough spot for West Virginia to turn around and have to go play Kansas next week, who is rejuvenated, revitalized, playing with a lot of energy. And there's going to be a pressure on Neil Brown here because that seat's getting hotter. He didn't go follow through and win the rivalry game. There were a lot of questions about his coaching decisions after the game, and now it's like a must win. You got to go beat Kansas. Can you get your team back on that level after expanding all that energy that you had the entire offseason to work toward? You put out all that energy to go play your arch rival in Pitt, and now you've got to regroup for the team that has meant nothing to anybody in the league for a long time in terms of excitement. So tricky spot, but that's another piece of why I feel like the Big 12 proved in week 1 that it is going to be much better top to bottom. Texas Tech, they rolled with 3 different quarterbacks. Now, not good news that Tyler Shuck is out with an injury and that it looked like it could be the collarbone again. I have not seen any real tangible update on that yet. Good news for Texas Tech. I mean, look, Donovan Smith, I think, is pretty good, and he showed that last year, and he showed that on Saturday. But still, that is a concern. However, Texas Tech, they put up a 60 burger on Saturday. Yeah, 63-10. Pretty impressive effort all the way around. Good start for Joey McGuire and company. Yes, what do you take from a victory over Murray State? I don't know. It is very difficult to know, but it's much better than the alternative. So the 2 teams picked their at the bottom of the Big 12 standings, and then if you want to lump West Virginia in with them, all had pretty impressive week 1s. TCU, that was a pretty rough first half. I think Colorado might be in the running for worst Power 5 football team in the country this year, but eventually took care of business. Also had to deal with a quarterback injury in Chandler Morris. I did see a report today that it might only be 4 weeks for Chandler Morris, which would be encouraging if I'm a TCU fan, because I don't know. Max Duggan doesn't do it for me. I know they have the 3rd kid too. Maybe that's the deal. Maybe he'll wind up being the guy, but I would have preferred Chandler Morris very much in that quarterback comp. So again, tough loss there for TCU, but TCU is, if you're going by recruiting rankings, they have the most room to me to be sluggish in week 1 because they have the 3rd most talented roster according to recruiting rankings in the Big 12 behind Texas and Oklahoma. they're not going to be a pushover week in and week out. Again, that would be a difficult out, I think, for most teams this year, even if they are going to struggle a little bit and be in a fight for bowl eligibility. So, some thoughts from me on what speaks to the depth of the Big 12 from what we saw in week one. And even, some notoriously slow starters. I know there's a lot of donations, guys. I'll get caught up on it here in just a second. Notoriously slow starters didn't have a ton of issues. Iowa State always seems to be very slow, tripping over themselves out of the gate. No problems with a new quarterback, with all the new faces that they have replacing Brock Purdy, Brees Hall, Mike Rose, all those studs that they had last year that they lost 42-10 over SEMO, and got a really nice game from Hunter Deckers, their new starting quarterback. And Baylor had the sluggish, I guess you could kind of a slog of a game at Texas State last year to open up the year before getting on a roll and obviously winning the Big 12 championship. None of that at all, man. Baylor really looked the part. I know it's Albany. Like, what can you take from a game against Albany? But Baylor looked the part. Blake Shapen looked awesome. So no slow starts there from those teams. So a lot of good, I think, there for the Big 12. All right, let's get to some donations. If you want to donate and get your question or comment here on the chat, you do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something. And also that is how you support the work that I'm doing here on the channel to bring you Big 12 content week in and week out. James says the Houston UTSA game was exciting. I was hoping Houston would get a solid win, but happy they pulled it out. It's fun to watch games where you don't know who is going to win going in. James, that was a hell of a game, man. Houston, of all the teams that we're talking about here, that's the game of the week. Houston, Clayton Tune, I got to give that kid a ton of credit for the play that he made at the end of the game to win there. If you have not seen that, you need to go watch it immediately, selling his body out to go flip into the end zone to get it done at the end, 37-35 in a game that went into overtime for Houston. UTSA had a really good year last year, and going and having to play that game in San Antonio, that is not easy at all. So shout out to them, one, for playing the game. That's a really fun game and a cool game for the state of Texas. And then to be able to find a gritty way to pull out that win, I think is a great sign for Houston. If you're going to have a special kind of season, this is where I would caution anybody that's going to be like, Houston overrated, not that good. I mean, if you're going to have a special type of year, you're going to have games like that. You will absolutely have games like that where you may not be totally at your best. In this case, like it's week one, you may be working out some kinks and you just find a way. Like you go on the road and just find a way. Things are difficult. Times are difficult. You've got to find a way to dig down and go get that win. And most people that are critical of Dana Holgorsen, I would not think would ascribe that sort of trait, like a toughness like that, to teams that he typically coaches. But I think they showed a lot of toughness in being able to do that and gut it out. And that's really what it was. It was gutting it out, man. Gutting it out. And now it doesn't get much easier. You're going to have to go to Texas Tech, but you're going to arrive at that game a lot more battle-tested than Texas Tech, who I'm not criticizing Tech at all, but just a very different kind of vibe of what they had in week one with their game, where they're playing Murray State. They cruise. They don't have to worry. They're not stressed, right? So you're going to arrive in that game a little more battle-tested and better for the wear, not worse for the wear, but better for the wear, I would say, for Houston going through that game in week one. So, yes, that was a great game. Great game. Okay, Robert, thank you for the donation. Robert says, it is better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to talk and remove all doubt. Mark Twain. Pac-12 homer Mandel picked Utah to be in the college football playoff. I saw Mandel's name early on in that, Robert, and I was like, all right, where's this thing going to tie back around to everybody's favorite Stuart Mandel here? He was, I mean, look, I try to always be respectful because he's been nice. He's come on the show. He's come on the channel before, all these different things. But, man, he had some bad takes. He had some bad takes within the past week. There's no doubt about that. I won't deny that. But he's not the only one. I will say this at least for him, Robert. He is not the only one that had Utah in the playoff. A lot of people did. And Utah may not be totally out of the playoff picture. I know the narrative on the Pac-12 after week one is that they probably knocked themselves almost all the way out. If they were to run the table, if Utah runs the table, I think they could still get in because they have a lot of this is perception. And what we're talking about here, there were Mandels of the world picking them to make the playoff. A lot of people were very high on them, and they lost to an SEC team on the road in a really close game. So that's overcomable if Florida has a nice year. That's overcomable, I think, for Utah if some other teams lose in front of them, right? If it's not like a super strong year for that 4 spot in the playoff. But yes, not a great look for everybody there, because the counterpoint to that would be, yes, it's in the swamp, not an easy place to play, but Florida's been a bit of a mess themselves in general over the last decade or so, with, yes, some fluctuation, a high point or two there, but like, I don't, Kyle Trask wasn't walking through that door, although Richardson looks like a hell of a quarterback potentially for Florida too. So maybe I should watch it a little bit there. But that would be the counterpoint. Like, that was game one for a new coach, Billy Napier, who there's been some consternation with, it sounded like, from Florida circles and recruiting, at least leading up to the first game. And you still went out and lost that game. It was definitely a chance to make a statement that was missed by Utah there. So, yes, lots of people with a little bit of egg on their face for riding high. I mean, riding high. People really were riding for Utah this year. And look, I as much as Utah fans have been annoying throughout realignment, it's hard not to really appreciate their brand of football and Kyle Whittingham as a coach. So it's not like I was rooting against them there, but yes, it does not help out the overall Pac-12 narrative in any way, shape, or form. Hazen, thank you, Hazen. I appreciate the donation. Hazen says, "Go Cats! John Kurtz rocks, man. Look at that chin. SMDH. That's right. This chin, jawline, still going. Everybody, still top 5% in Kansas. Even though I'm actually officially a Missouri resident now. I got my Missouri driver's license the other day because I had to. I waited until I absolutely had to, but I did. I got a Missouri driver's license. So heading into a week in which my squad plays Missouri, I'm a little bit ashamed to admit that to you here on this microphone. But that's what happens when you want to live in downtown Kansas City. But appreciate you, Hazen, for being here, and thank you for the donation, my friend. Gene, thank you for the donation. Gene says, "Glad it's not hot and humid and there's nothing to do in Florida, or I couldn't support UCF. Go Big 12, charge on Knights." Great job, Gene. That is some great shade thrown at the good old Pac-12 and all the defenders who stand up and say, "Oh, it's just too hot for anybody to go out to the Rose Bowl." It's too hot for UCLA to expect to draw more than 2,500 people for a game at the Rose Bowl. By the way, they announced an attendance of 2,700 or 27,000 rather. Not even close, man. Not even close. Go look at the pictures. But yes, exactly. It's hot and humid. Weather sucks if you're getting a really hot game in Florida too, and people go out. Like, that's the point here. Yes, guys, I understand, Doug Gottlieb, that there's a lot to do out in LA. And so it's harder to draw because of that. I fully understand that. But that's kind of the point. It's like when people would make that point about, let me see if I can get this straight. I had this thought over the weekend. When people made the point about the Pac-12 having the late kick windows, and that was the reason that their numbers were higher, right? That was the narrative. The TV numbers are higher for the Pac-12 because they have that late window where there's no competition, Pac-12 after dark. And we would sit here and say, well, yeah, but if you gave the Big 12 that slot, the numbers would be higher because there's a more passionate fan base. Well, the response from the Mandels of the world always was, yes, but that's not the reality. You don't have that because you're not in that time zone. That's actually the argument like that I would make here. Yes, there's not as much to do in the Midwest and generally almost every other college football city, environment, whatever out there. But people go to the games, and that's the reality. Like, the reality is you're in LA. You have to deal with that. These Pac-12 schools are where they are. And while it's an advantage for the late time slot they get to play, it's a disadvantage for the fan interest. And so it is fair, very fair criticism to point there at UCLA and say, okay, so what, it's hot. So what, there's other things to do. That's a disadvantage UCLA is going to have to deal with. Like, that's not going to go away. And that doesn't go away for all these Pac-12 schools. So I would just throw the Pac-12's own argument, their propaganda machine's own argument, back in their face on that front. So I love it, Gene. I love it. That's strong. That is strong. T-Luft, very generous donation. Thank you. I appreciate that a ton. And you're a man after my own heart, or woman. I don't know who it is. I'm sorry, T-Luft. That's an ambiguous name. I'm not sure. But says K-State wins the Big 12 unless they call holding. Farmageddon. Okay. Hey, look, I'm going to support it. I am going to support it because, look, I was not, and if you want, I'm sure you guys are all waiting with bated breath for my take on K-State beating South Dakota 34-0. I come away from that game pretty pleased in a lot of areas, but a big major concern to me is the passing game for K-State. Adrian Martinez threw for less than 100 yards because they didn't need to, mostly. They ran for almost 300 yards. They got a special teams touchdown. The defense was dominant. They just didn't have to do a lot there. They have Missouri coming up this week. I'm sure they didn't want to put much on film, but it felt to me like Adrian Martinez had a little bit in him of like, I don't want to force much at all here to a fault because I don't want to turn it over. And we all know the turnover issues that he had in his Nebraska career. So I would be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about that, because about everything else looked good other than K-State's kicking situation. So you come out of it like, the kicking and then downfield passing game. Where's that going to be? But I still think there's a lot of talent, and it's a much deeper and the depth of talent on that roster is so much better than it's been for any of Chris Kleiman's seasons at K-State so far. So T-Left, I'm gonna hang in there with you. I'm gonna hang in there with you for right now, but I think we'll learn a lot more next week. But thank you for being here. Thank you for the donation. Much appreciate that all the way around. David, let's see, where'd David Z go? David Z says, yes, KU didn't play anyone in West Virginia, had a quality matchup. With that said, I think KU actually has a chance and can get the W in Morgantown. Go Cyclones. Well, congratulations on a week 1 victory for you that was stress-free. David Z didn't have to worry about, Northern Iowa being tricky and pesky. Like it seems like always happens every year. It seems like Iowa State's always opening the year with Northern Iowa. I guess it was it Louisiana a couple of years ago that got him too. You didn't have to worry about any of that. Stress-free victory. So congratulations on that. And, Hunter Decker's looking pretty good. And I agree with you, man. I mean, I think the trick will be, can West Virginia rally themselves emotionally? Because so much went into that game and it was such a crushing defeat. Like that's a really tough thing to bounce back from. And then this is not an opponent that will get you motivated typically on your own. And well, most of, I think the world of Big 12 fans are in tune with the fact that Kansas is getting much better and not the pushover that they used to be. That can still be a tough thing to impress upon the mind of an 18 to 22-year-old kid that's trying to get over last week, and an 18 to 22-year-old kid that's used to having a bunch of success against Kansas. So I'm with you. I am incredibly intrigued to see how that game will actually play out. And Kansas has every reason right now to be about as confident as they've been in a league, particularly a league road game, than they have been in a while. And Morgantown's a difficult place to play. And I'm sure people will be in there and filled up and fired up and hopefully still optimistic about the team after week 1. But again, even for the fans, like how much can you get up for that Kansas game? That's a tough one to do. Daniel, what's up, Daniel? Daniel the Gaston says, pains me. I think Baylor beats BYU. Go Cougars. Should be a great game. I saw an early line on that game. Let me pull up my Insider College Football. I don't remember specifically what the line was, but I remember looking at it and thinking like, it is interesting. Bear with me here. No, I'm still in week 1, so I'm seeing BYU USF. My apologies here. The benefits of doing this live. BYU 3-point favorite. There we go. I thought it was like around a field goal. So BYU a 3-point home favorite against Baylor, which means that theoretically Vegas thinks those two teams are even on a neutral field. I'm going to have to flesh this one out. I'll have to think about all this. I mean, my general lean early would be Baylor because I'm very high on the Bears this year. But that'll be a test for Shapen, and BYU looked really good in week 1. So huge game, obviously, for BYU, which has put together a schedule that is no laughing matter at all. Matt, I appreciate the donation. Matt says Tech had 60K against an FCS school. No excuses. Love that. Matt, Texas Tech, 60K showing up against an FCS school. Now, Matt, I will say, new regime. All right. There's a ton of excitement around Texas. Like Joey McGuire has built up a lot of excitement. But yes, that is the point about the fan bases in general. Like they care. They care a lot more, as we're still carrying through some of the attendance talk here. The fan bases really care a lot more. Tony says people went to the hospital for heat stroke in LA and San Diego. That said, you couldn't pay me to fight the nightmare traffic to see Bowling Green play UCLA. Hey, look, again, I don't begrudge anybody for having that opinion and thinking that. But the problem is that's the reality of being in LA, and that's the reality of some of these schools being on the West Coast. Like none of that's changing anytime soon. So I'm not faulting people for not going. I'm just saying like that's a reality of your program that you're going to have to deal with, and it deserves to be pointed out by fan bases that don't have that issue. Like the same way that Pac-12 schools would look down on everybody in Big 12 country and say, you're JUCOs, you don't have the academics, and kind of thumb their nose up. well, this is where we can thumb our noses back and be like, well, you guys don't actually show up to watch your damn teams. So I'm okay with anybody here in Big 12 country throwing some soft shade there. M. Alvarez, thank you for the donation. Says BYU fans showed up even in bad weather and humidity. Yeah, there was like a 2.5 hour delay before BYU got started, and then they scored on like their first play from scrimmage. So yeah, I had to deal with that. Oscar says Sick'em beat BYU. He's got his Bears, I would imagine, this weekend. Should be some fun back and forth. If you guys are ready to talk some smack here, we got some intra new Big 12 conference matchups this week with Tech and Houston and BYU and Baylor. Get your thoughts in now, man. Speak now or forever hold your peace, I guess is how I should put that. Why can I not see week 2 here? I was gonna roll through. I mean, what a schedule we have. Missouri, K-State, Alabama, Texas, Houston, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Iowa, Kansas, West Virginia, Arizona State, Oklahoma State, Baylor, BYU. It is a loaded schedule in the Big 12 this week, man. This is going to be a fun week. Fun week. Aglist, thank you for the donation. Much appreciated. Aglist says, John, great show. Still think 4 wins for KU not possible. We still have at least one more win with Texas on the schedule. See you in Manhattan for the K-State KU tailgate. Rock Chalk Jayhawk, Allen. You know what? 4 wins I think is possible. I think 4 wins is possible. I was definitely seeing Kansas as more like 2 or probably 3. If you would have really pinned me down before the season, I would have said 3. But I did not expect Kansas to come out and demolish anybody, like literally anybody, the way that they did like that. Or at least it is jarring to see that. It is clear that there is improvement being made. I think this week will tell us a lot because West Virginia, yes, improved, but this is the type of team that you can get. Very gettable. And in terms of circumstance, having them come off the rivalry game, a devastating loss, and then the quick turnaround, I think situationally, it's about as advantageous as it gets for Kansas. So I do need to see something this week. But yes, I think 4 wins is definitely a possibility. I definitely do. As a Kansas fan, yes, I understand the optimism, Kansas fans. It doesn't mean there's not some dumb stuff out there on Twitter with people getting a little too chirpy about it all, but I understand the optimism and the excitement, and I would anticipate that I'm going to be the same way with K-State basketball coming up this year because I think they will be better and improved, and I'll start to, probably get over the top, backing up my squad when little improvements are shown, and they've already done that certainly on the recruiting trail with Jerome Tang and company. So I get it, and yes, 4 wins could be on the table for them. Robert, thank you for the donation. Robert, I appreciate it. Robert says NC State struggled against ECU. Houston struggled against UTSA. Tech 3-0 going into the Texas game. Wreck 'em. Okay, well, see, this is where I love getting the perspective of different fan bases throughout the league because I knew NC State was on the schedule. I knew Houston was on the schedule, but I had not thought about it in that context or really like fleshed all that out. And so it's interesting to see how other fan bases are thinking about their teams here at this point in time coming off of week 1. So I appreciate the perspective here a lot, Robert. I will say this about NC State, like ECU is getting better. That is not as bad a program as they've been over the past like handful of years. They're starting to pull themselves out. And that is that can be a tricky place to play. And it's a place where like they are fired up. ECU, I have a little bit of familiarity there because of a friend of mine, Josh Graham, who hosts a great radio show in the Triad area now, but went to ECU and started doing radio in Greenville. I have a little familiarity there and know like the chippiness of the crowd there. Like that was kind of like walking into a hornet's nest the first game of the year. I wouldn't count NC State out too much because of their performance in that game. And yes, they did get bailed out by a couple of missed kicks at the end of the game, but I still think NC State is pretty good. I still think Houston's pretty good. If I were a Texas Tech fan, I'd be approaching this like get one of the next 2, and I would feel great. I would feel great. It's a difficult non-conference schedule that Tech has put together with NC State and Houston back to back. I would feel great if I got one of the next 2. But I can see how you'd look at that and be like, all right, they're a little more human than perhaps we thought before the season. So Red Raiders, look, I'm wearing my Patrick is my homie shirt right now. So Cactus Nation, I feel like you guys should be with me today because I got my Patrick Mahomes shirt on. Just waiting for next week when I can see him unleash his full fury on the NFL once again. Daniel, I see Daniel says, Smack between BYU and Baylor. Do you know us? Well, the Texas Tech Houston stuff was already happening in the chat before this one, so I just anticipated that we were going to see some more of that from everybody else here. But let's see, you guys. I'm just saying, it's the battleground has kind of already been laid here by Tech and Houston. So BYU and Baylor right now, it's a little too cordial for me in here. A little too cordial for me. If you want to join the chat tonight, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says "Say Something." Support the channel. Support me bringing you Big 12 content and get your voice heard here and be a part of the conversation. Plus, if you could like the video, I haven't even said that yet tonight. If you could like the video, that's free. Just takes one click. If you like the video, that also does help me out with the YouTube algorithm. I would much appreciate that. Matt says West Virginia Pitt threw up a 4 million viewer spot. I'm not going to take the national media's BS that the Big 12 doesn't draw well. We go right up against anybody. Well, Matt, I thank you for pointing that out. That is a point that I definitely wanted to make. So I have some Week 1 Big 12 hot takes for you. And one of those is that West Virginia and Pitt helped reinforce the SEC's position on realignment right now, which has basically been, we need to not go ahead and totally pull the ripcord on making this just 2 super leagues right now, because long term, that may not be the best thing financially for us, because if the sport loses enough interest from people who have grown up loving this thing, there won't be that much money around for the next contract or 2 contracts from now, and that you could be hurting yourself by doing too much right now. And the West Virginia Pitt game comes at a great time where realignment's still fresh on everybody's mind, not just because of USC and UCLA, but even what the news cycle was for the Pac-12, for instance, going into this opening week of games. And then we see the playoff come out where everyone's going to have more access, and you can kind of take a deep breath there. And we watch West Virginia and Pitt throw up it was a 3.15 million, but I do believe the peak concurrent number of viewers at one point was 5. I thought I saw that it touched 5 million at one point throughout the broadcast, which is a great number. That is the most watched Thursday night game on ESPN since 2017. West Virginia and Pitt was the most watched Thursday night game since 2017. And even game day, which preceded it, was up by 30% from the previous year's opening game day, which just tells you people wanted to see that game. And what it tells you is man, people love the rivalries. It's not that everybody just wants to see 2 super leagues. It's that people love rivalries where there's a hatred and there's a history and there's geography and all these things that play into it. Yes, Pitt won the ACC last year, but they were not returning Kenny Pickett. They were not returning Jordan Addison. They lost their offensive coordinator. West Virginia has been about a 500-ish team for the last couple of years. These are not 2 massive draws. And don't take that the wrong. I mean, it's not Ohio State and Alabama. When I say they're not massive draws, it's not Ohio State and Alabama, but people loved it because it's a game that means something in the context of college football, in the fabric of college football. And it turned into an awesome game with an awesome atmosphere, albeit sort of sloppy, but just something that we loved watching. And I think this is the kind of thing that can help some of these higher ups take a step back, at least for now, continue to ride this wave, which I think right now is trending toward all right, let's not do anything too terribly drastic right now when it comes to just totally tearing up everything about the sport. Let's take a deep breath. And I think that having that moment actually does help. I'm not saying that means something that's going to stop a major decision or anything like that necessarily, but I think it is another piece, another cog in that machine right now of where that's moving. So very valid point there, Matt. And it was awesome. It was awesome to watch that. I guess the other hot take I was going to give you was that Neil Brown is the biggest loser of Week 1 in the Big 12, but that's probably not that hot of a take because there wasn't that much negative that happened throughout the league, and he's getting grilled for the I'm going to call them mistakes that he made coaching. It seems like he disagrees with that. The other one I would give you is that I wouldn't hit the panic button on Oklahoma State's defense just yet. There was a lot of talk about that because they gave up 44 to Central Michigan. They're breaking in a new defensive coordinator. They did lose Jim Knowles, and I get how you look at it and say, well, they gave up 44 to Central Michigan after they lost Knowles, who was so great last year, especially with making those adjustments in the second half. Oklahoma State in the second half last year defensively was just ridiculous down the stretch run of the season. But look, they got up 51-15 early in the third quarter. So you're playing backups, and you just naturally are going to take your foot off the gas because Spencer Sanders was fabulous in the first half of that game. So I'm going to cut them some slack. First game with Derek Mason, you get way up and then you're starting to play some backups like earlier on in the game. I'm not going to panic too much. Now, I only had the Oklahoma State game on a second TV because I was, of course, watching the backyard brawl. So I wasn't like engrossed into every single play. But to me, it's not panic worthy for Oklahoma State. And honestly, I'd be more encouraged by the fact that Spencer Sanders was such a stud and picked up where he left off in the Fiesta Bowl than anything else. Because if I'm giving out like Big 12 helmet stickers this week, he's the top of the list. Spencer Sanders had 406 yards passing, 6 touchdowns, 313 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns in the first half. The only other Big 12 quarterback to do that ever, Patrick Mahomes. That's it. Spencer Sanders and Patrick Mahomes, the only Big 12 quarterbacks to ever do that in a half. I would also give a helmet sticker to C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia. 7 carries, 125 yards, 1 touchdown as a true freshman in the backyard brawl. Clayton Tune, man, putting your body on the line for the game-winning score like that, you got to give it to him from Houston. Hunter Deckers at Iowa State, 25 of 31, 293 yards, 4 touchdowns against SEMO. Honorable mention, Xavier Hutchinson had 3 touchdowns receiving in the first half for Iowa State also. Look, I'll give some love to the Oklahoma defense, which that's what everybody wanted to see, right? With Brent Venables in there, they had 6 sacks against UTEP. Texas, defensive back Deshaun Jameson. I'm even giving out helmet stickers to Texas and OU. Had a pick 6 and a block punt and a 52-10 win over Monroe. And then Taj Brook, Texas Tech running back, he had 3 first-half rushing touchdowns. So there are some thoughts on the week that was in the Big 12. I'm going to transition now here for the last, 10 minutes or so. We probably got 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more, but we're getting close to kind of your 10-minute warning here on the live. If you have anything that you want to get in, hit the $ below the chat box where it says say something to donate. Make sure your question or comment gets in here on the chat, and I will read it. If you build it, they will come. If you donate, I'll read it and cuts through the noise of the rest of the chat. Also, if you could like the video, I'd appreciate it. Helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. Doesn't cost you a cent. So the news on playoff expansion. I'm going to read you some of John Wilner's article here from Pac-12 country because I think the real effect is going to be on the Pac-12 right now. And he does a pretty good job, I think, of framing it up here. So when the commissioners couldn't deliver, the president stepped in and got it done. The college football playoff will finally officially expand to 12 teams in the 2026 season and possibly earlier. The university presidents and chancellors who make up the college football playoffs board of managers approved expansion Friday, approximately 8 months after the conference commissioners failed to agree on that format. Next week, the leaders of the 10 FBS conferences and Notre Dame AD Jack Swarbrick will convene to presumably hammer out the specifics. So it's good news for the Big 12. You're going to have access to the playoff now. The gist of this is a 12-team playoff. You're going to have the 6 highest rated conference champions. So this really is. It is like the proposal that was pushed, almost got there. Texas and Oklahoma left. Nobody trusted anybody. We had an alliance, and it didn't happen. And Jim Phillips was working against his own self-interest and all of that, and it stopped and fell apart. Now we have it. So you're going to have 6 highest rated conference champions, which means the Big 12 champion every year could even be lower than a group of 5 champion and still make the playoff. That is very good for the Big 12. As good as it gets, short of an automatic bid for the league in and of itself. It's a pseudo automatic bid almost for the league there. And especially if you're going to continue to do 1v2 playing the conference championship game, it basically is an automatic bid because the only threat there would be that you have someone with like 3 or 4 losses somehow in a division coming through and then winning the championship game. That would be about the only way that you're not going to get somebody in. So very, very good news. Very good news as far as that goes for the Big 12. I'm looking here at this donation that just came in from Joe. What's up, Joe? Joe says, "Oh hell, John, not Denise Dodd. Give me Brett McMurphy's reporting." Well, none of this is Dennis Dodd. None of this is Dennis Dodd. This is John Wilner. The playoff expansion, that's been reported all over the place. ESPN. I think Ross Dellinger actually really broke the news from Sports Illustrated, who was first on top of that. Like college football world, we don't have to worry about how reliable is the sourcing here. This is not quite like some of that realignment news there for a while. So, but I am with you. Brett McMurphy is high on that list for me. Like, I feel like he gets slept on a little bit in the college football national reporter game. I definitely trust Brett McMurphy here, but he's in on this too. So hopefully that will suffice here. But Here is what John Wilner has to say about this from the Pac-12's perspective when it comes to access. He says, one critical piece, access, has a working framework in place. The 6 highest rated conference champions and 6 at-large teams will make up the 12-team field. In other words, the Pac-12 would have a clear pathway to the event as long as its champion is one of the top 6. Put another way, the Pac-12 winner could be ranked behind the champions of the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and a winner from one of the group of 5 leagues and still make the field. So my hope with this too, by the way, another piece of this playoff that I think is good and potentially positive for the Big 12 beyond merely just access and the fact that it gives you access to the playoff is I still hold out hope that this will at least mitigate some of the talent disparity that we're seeing at the top of the sport over time. That gradually, if you have 12 teams every year and every conference is represented, that it will be an easier sell to recruits that like, hey, you can still get to the playoff from here. You can still conceivably win a national championship from here, whereas it is much tougher to say that right now. And especially if it were going to be just a 14 playoff with the new Big 12 minus Texas and OU, like becomes more difficult to say, hey, you legitimately could make the 14 playoff from here and have a chance. If you can do that, more schools would be able to do that. My hope would be over time that would start to slowly, at least a little bit, erode the concentration of talent that we have at the top of the sport right now, which is pretty apparent and is definitely an issue if you're somebody that really likes competitiveness across the board and you really like parity. So I am hoping that will help. And also an advantage here, actually, I think within the format of what's been proposed is that the first round games would be on campus. And then after that, when the teams with buys come into it, then they would be playing at neutral bowl sites. So it's actually some of the not top 4 teams would get access to a playoff home game, which I think will be insane atmospheres. Will just be nuts. Look awesome on TV. You'd be able to sell that. And when kids start seeing that and that happening in places that aren't just like Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, they can be like, oh, I could go play in that, like in a playoff game with the stakes. I think that kind of thing could help recruiting as well. But this is really where what you guys are really here for is the piece of this and how it relates to conference realignment. The point is made by Wilner here that says, so I'll just read to you. He says, additionally, the allocation of automatic bids to conference winners will substantially increase the media value of the Pac-12 championship game, an important piece of the football inventory currently on the negotiating table. Turns it into a play-in game. The regular season seemingly becomes a more valuable property as well, perhaps the point that networks opposed to bidding on the Pac-12 media rights without the LA schools are now more motivated. Okay, so the idea there would be Pac-12 regular season games mean more and are more valuable to TV now, would draw more viewership because everybody will be looking at it like, hey, there are stakes attached here. If Oregon, who may already have a loss or two and may have lost 49-3 in week 1 to Georgia, but they have this game coming up at Washington, or they have this game coming up at Oregon State, who had a really nice week 1, by the way, and this means a lot to the actual Pac-12 title race, then that means it ergo means something to the college football playoff race. And we'll watch something with more stakes attached to it. You're more likely to get a better number there out of that. It's like Baylor and Oklahoma State. Yes, they're not Texas and Oklahoma from a brand value standpoint, but they had 8 million people watching them in the Big 12 championship game last year because everybody knew the stakes. There's a possibility of one of these teams getting to the playoff. Turns into a great game. Same thing here. So TV likely is going to pay more for the Pac-12, but also the Big 12. Everything being said here now about the Pac-12 would also apply to the Big 12 and the Big 12's next deal here. But the Pac-12 is the one that seemingly needs it more because they're having the toughest time right now in terms of competitiveness on the field, and they took a big step towards playing themselves out of the current playoff format already in week 1 anyway with the performances of Utah and Oregon. My thought here is like, is this enough to get Oregon and Washington to stick around? If the TV value is going to be more, that's a step. All right. You'd already have more money to throw at Oregon and Washington to stick around. You could also make the argument that for Oregon and Washington, it will be easier to make the playoff in the Pac-12. All you got to do is go through with maybe one lot. Like you can lose a game still, win the Pac-12. You could lose 2 games, perhaps, depending on if one's a non-conference game. Like if you're Oregon and you go out and schedule Georgia and you get whacked, just come back and win the league. You'll be good. You're golden. You're in the playoff. You've got your shot. As opposed to go to the Big Ten and you might have a two games worth of leeway there. You're probably getting at least an extra game, but you're going to have so many more difficult games if that turns into like a super league. So you can throw Easier path here in the Pac-12, still access to the playoff. Now you're going to get a little bit more money. And the other thing is there's going to be more money coming in from the playoff participants because now with a bigger playoff, there's just more money to throw around all over the place. And this theory that's been talked about a long time for the Pac-12 with when they've said unequal revenue sharing, really a lot of what people mean and the one that they think is more plausible is that they would say, if you make the playoff, Oregon, you get to take the lion's share of that money as opposed to it all being sprinkled throughout the conference. So now there's a way to financially incentivize Oregon even more with that because there will be more money coming in from the playoff. And I even Wilner speculated about this. I don't know ultimately how much of a factor. I'm a little more skeptical on this, but he said maybe this lessens some of the want from the Big Ten because it would make things more difficult for the Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan states of the world, that second tier of teams they have that certainly would be candidates to make a 12-team playoff typically. If it's going to be more difficult for them, they're not going to want to vote for expansion right now. They may not want to get on board with it right now if they're looking at it and say, well, hey, we don't need more good teams in this league right now. We need to ensure that we have our access. And there's already been some rumblings of that within the Big Ten that not all the presidents necessarily are on board with that. So those are all points I think to consider. And I think that very well could slow down realignment for right now, like for this round. I think things got hot and heavy real fast with USC, UCLA. Everybody panicked and thought we were just going into crazy mode again. We teetered, we got close to the edge, and it feels like now it's starting to pull back, like taking a couple steps back from the ledge on that now. And we may move forward at least for a handful of years with the Big 12 and the Pac-12 still intact. Caveat, I always say it's realignment. Things could change in a second. I might be doing an emergency video here very shortly because something crazy happens. But that's my feel on it right now. And what was really like a tectonic move. I mean, that's the tectonic plates moving in college football. That's a huge move. I think we all thought the next huge move would be another realignment thing. Instead, it's the playoff and playoff access being granted to some of the have-nots, if you will, of the college football world, everybody outside of the SEC and the Big Ten. Joe, thank you for another donation. Joe says, get control of NIL. Man, I know a lot of people are with you. A lot of people are with you, and they want to see that happen. I don't know what the solutions are to that. I don't know what the solutions are to that right now. But maybe, I mean, we have seen some schools be able to use NIL to their advantage, like non-blue blood, non-big boy schools. And if you compare that now with playoff access and finding ways to get creative with NIL or utilizing a Boone Pickens, if you got that, or a Phil Knight, if you got that, maybe there's more ammo for some schools to use that to their advantage here and not just the blue blood powerhouses. All right, Glenn, I'm going to read Glenn's comment here because he donated. If you have anything, get it in right now. I'm about to hop off here. You got another minute or two if you want to get it in. Click the $ below the chat box where it says say something in order to do so. But Glenn says, even though, and I appreciate it, Glenn, another donation. Glenn says, even though I'm a BYU fan, let's give a shout out to my alma mater, Weber State, FCS Big Sky Conference for the win over FCS Western Oregon. All right, there we go. Weber State, man. Let's go. I'm trying to think. Whenever I see something like this, I'm like, what do I know about Weber State that I could expand upon for a second? I know that I've seen them in the NCAA tournament before. Have they pulled a big upset? Weber State pulled a big upset. Where's Weber State at? Weber State location. Ogden, Utah. All right, Ogden, Utah. Weber State, big dub. Shout out, getting it done week one. That's cool, man. I'm here for the shout outs, whatever you guys want. Fun chat today. Fun to be talking about some actual football. We'll be back at it the rest of the week. Wednesday, I should be on track for a live show. And then again on Sunday to react to what will be an excellent, excellent week 2, man. Let me read you these one more time. Guys, if you're not fired up for week 2 in the Big 12, let me read you this schedule. 11 a.m., Mizzou at K-State. 11 a.m., Bama at Texas. 3 o'clock in that window, you've got Houston and Texas Tech. You've got Iowa State and Iowa. Then at 5, you've got Kansas at West Virginia. And then in the night games, Kent State at Oklahoma, but Arizona State at Oklahoma State. Tarleton at TCU. And then Baylor and BYU in the late. We got Big 12 after dark. How about that? Big 12 after dark at 9:15, Baylor and BYU. So it is going to be an amazing weekend. And I am just overjoyed that I get to be in a wedding this weekend and miss a lot of it. But I'll have my phone will be working overtime trying to allow me to watch whatever it is that I can. I'm in a wedding, not just like attending a wedding, but in a wedding on Saturday. So the DVR will be doing a lot of work, and I'll have to be getting caught up probably next week during the week to watch more of these games. But I'm going to do my best to enjoy what should be an awesome, awesome week of football coming up in the Big 12. So appreciate you guys. Thanks for being here. Spread the word. If you have friends or family that you think would be interested in this, let them know on social media. If you have Facebook groups, whatever, Twitter groups, let them know. If they're Big 12 fans of your school that you think would enjoy the channel, let's continue to grow this thing. Hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz if you have anything. If you're watching this taped, it's John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo to support the channel as well. And once again, I will talk to all you guys soon. Thanks for being here.